satellite instead of humans, Nintendo War, and by usurping the old conventional chains of command, Tesla prophesied similarly in 1905, "Had only a few of my teleautomatic torpedoes been constructed and adopted by our Navy instead of rejected, the mere moral influence of this would have been powerfully and most beneficially felt in the present Eastern, Russian-Japanese, complication. Not to speak of the advantages which might have been secured through the direct and instantaneous transmission of messages to distant colonies and scenes of the present barbarous conflicts." His treatise went on to describe a new quasi-intelligent missile guidance system that he was developing, which would have a greater range and unerring precision, but also that misunderstanding is the basis of wars. Speaking to Morgan in veiled terms that helped to explain why so many of Tesla's most important theoretical writings can be found in the pages of the New York Times, the Herald Tribune, the Sun, and the World, the inventor wrote, "Mutual understanding would be immensely facilitated by the use of one universal tongue. Next to speech, we must consider permanent records of all kinds. Here the newspapers play by far the most important part. Disregarding the force of electrical invention, that of journalism is the greatest in urging us to peace. That which is most desirable in the establishment of universal peaceful relations is the complete annihilation of distance. To achieve this wonder, electricity is the one and only means." If Morgan were to fund him, universal peace would ensue. This was quite a responsibility he placed on his benefactor's shoulders. Continuing for 5 more fact-filled pages, Tesla described in vivid detail his entire world telegraphy operation, precisely how it worked and what it attempted to accomplish. Referring to the thunderstorm he had witnessed that summer night in the Colorado Rockies and his discovery of stationary waves, Tesla concludes, "On that unforgettable day, the dark god of thunder mercifully showed me in his vast, awe-sounding laboratory the geomagnetic pulse. I thought then that it would take a year to establish commercially my wireless girdle around the world. Alas, my first world telegraphy plant is not yet completed. Its construction has progressed but slowly during the past 2 years. And this machine I am building is but a plaything, an oscillator of a maximum activity of only 10 million horsepower, just enough to throw this planet into feeble tremors by sign and word, to telegraph and to telephone." Although trying to assure Morgan that Wardenclyffe would not usurp the power companies, Tesla had to go on, "When shall I see completed that first power plant, that big oscillator which I am designing, which will deliver energy at the rate of 1,000 million horsepower, 100 falls of Niagara combined in one, striking the universe with blows, blows that will wake from their slumber the sleeping electricians, if there be any, on Venus or Mars? It is not a dream. It is a simple feat of scientific electrical engineering, only expensive. Blind, faint-hearted world." Had he shown restraint, would this treatise have served its purpose, transforming the capitalist into the philanthropist? Probably not. In any event, Tesla further injured his position by ending the essay with a final stab. "Perhaps it is better in this present world of ours that a revolutionary idea or invention, instead of being helped and patted, be hampered and ill-treated in its adolescence by selfish interest, pedantry, stupidity, and ignorance, that it be attacked and stifled, that it pass through bitter trials and tribulations, through the heartless strife of commercial existence. So do we get our light. So all that was great in the past was ridiculed, condemned, combated, suppressed, only to emerge all the more powerfully, all the more triumphantly from the struggle." February the 17th, 1905. Dear Mr. Morgan, let me tell you once more, I have perfected the greatest invention of all time, the transmission of electrical energy without wires to any distance, a work which has consumed 10 years of my life. It is the long-sought stone of the philosophers. I need but to complete the plant I have constructed, and in one bound humanity will advance centuries. I am the only man on this earth today who has the peculiar knowledge and ability to achieve this wonder, and another one may not come in 100 years. Help me to complete this work, or else remove the obstacles in my path. I was heartily glad to see you in such splendid health yesterday. You are good for another 20 years of active life. Faithfully yours, N. Tesla. Pressures continued to mount. Warden's lawyer pressed for a mortgage payment, and one of Tesla's previous workers, a Mr. Clark, was suing for past wages. When some of the bad news arrived at his Waldorf suite, the inventor tore the letter sufficiently to prevent any undesirable person from reading the terrible open secret of Wardenclyffe. Tesla tried to maintain a balance by persevering with the development of his oscillators and other inventions, such as a transformer, a condenser, and a steam turbine. But these operations were long-range projects that would not provide immediate payoffs on the order needed to reopen the wireless operation. "The obstacles in my way," Tesla wrote Sheriff, "are a regular hydra. Just as soon as I chop off a head, 2 new ones grow." Tesla began to write exclusively in pencil during this period, his writing becoming less distinct, lacking the boldness and clarity which had characterized it at earlier periods. Beginning to feel run down on a more regular basis, Tesla likened his task to that of a weightlifter. "Every ounce counts now," he told his manager. March 10th, 1905. My dear Luca, I won't go to dinner with you. I am hard at work to get Mrs. Philippoff that fine automobile. At the end of March, Tesla was thunderstruck at the Waldorf when Warden's lawyer stormed the premises demanding immediate payment. The raising of even one of Mr. Bolt's eyebrows was enough to unsettle the struggling entrepreneur. "Hope to get out to Wardenclyffe Sunday," Tesla wrote Sheriff. "Need it badly." Tesla set to work with his lawyers in April, finalizing patent applications for England, France, and Italy. But his inability to adequately compensate his workers on Long Island was creating a demoralizing effect at Wardenclyffe. "Perhaps we are nearing a revolution down there," he inquired of Sheriff. Disappointments and dangers, troubles and troubles again, continued to plague him. He was beginning to crumble. May 1st, 1905. My dear Tesla, I know it will please you to hear of the great happiness that has come to me. Miss Griselda Houston Hull has consented to become my wife, and the wedding has been planned for May 25th. You know, my dear Tesla, you're the very first person outside of my family that I thought of, and which the ceremonies will be very simple. I wish to feel you present in standing close to me on this occasion, so full of incoming in my life. Indeed, I could not feel the occasion complete without you. Sincerely yours, Richmond Pearson Hobson. The joyful occasion was a needed respite. Tesla, chatting with Hobson's mother-in-law, hiding his worries and characteristically teasing his friend. "Hobson," he declared, "now that you are married, your career is over." This, of course, was far from the truth, as rumors had long been circulating about the possibility of grooming the charismatic lieutenant for the presidency. "I must do something for our dear Mr. Tesla," Catherine told Robert on the ride home. "What could you do that he hasn't?" "Appeal to the king," she answered wistfully. Upon their arrival home, Catherine ran to the house to hide her tears. While Morgan was away in Europe for his summer sojourn, Tesla met with Jacob Schiff, a man in the midst of lending the Japanese large sums of money in their war against the Russians. S. said that perhaps he may take it himself. Tesla wrote hopefully to Schiff, "I believe that he will be a valuable man to me." In August, Morgan returned. Tesla sent Schiff to hand-deliver his newest list of patents granted, which the octopus grabbed in his tentacles and tossed into the wastebasket. November 11th, 1905. Dear Mr. Sheriff, 13 seems to be my lucky number. First of all, I met with Mr. F. just for a moment as he was going out of his office. He was most friendly, and said he was sorry he had to go out, but he will talk with me some other day. I have my man, as sure as the law of gravitation. I know it. December 14th, 1905. My dear Mr. Tesla, I have received your letter of the 13th, and in reply would state that I am not willing to invest any more money in the enterprise. I should be very glad if Mr. Frick would join you. You could have no better associate, and I should be very glad to work with Mr. Frick in the matter, putting in what I have against his $100,000 to which you allude. Yours very truly, J. Pierpont Morgan. Christmas was approaching, and Tesla had apparently struck a deal with another of the super-rich. Frick, we remember, had earned upward of $60 million in 1901 when U.S. Steel was created. Ryan and Schiff were also involved in this new potential syndicate. Tesla wrote Morgan to thank him for allowing the liaison to come about. "You and Mr. Frick can take whatever you like. I shall be satisfied with a very small interest," Tesla wrote in a first draft. "I understand your attitude perfectly. You adhere strictly to principles. Never in my life have I met a man who even in a small way can approach the state as described by Goethe." Yet again Tesla reviewed their relationship, his decision to change the contract, and his ultimate wish to transmit power for industrial purposes. Why? Morgan sidestepped a meeting with Frick in December. An ill wind was blowing. Tesla began to crumble, his handwriting now barely legible, written as a meagre, wispy stroke in pencil. December 24th, 1905. Dear Tesla, I've been sorry to hear of your recent illness, well concealed from your friends and the public, and I am also now very glad to hear of your recovery. Please stay well and strong. Yours sincerely, T.C. Martin. January 24th, 1906. Dear Mr. Morgan, I have just learned that the Germans have commenced the construction of a plant in all respects similar to mine, which they expect to complete in a year. Now, Mr. Morgan, you do not wish such a horrible thing to happen. If Frick will aid me, I can without delay put my plant in operation by July next. Please see him at your earliest opportunity. I have not much time to lose. With the Johnsons just back from Europe and a meeting with His Majesty in Rome, Kate decided to seize the moment. Completely on her own, Mrs. Robert Underwood Johnson called a hansom. 23 Wall Street, she said boldly. Morgan would not see her. February the 2nd, 1906. Dear Mr. Morgan, please see Mr. Frick. He is going to call on you. Time is flying. A fortnight later, Tesla wrote again, pleading with Morgan to allow the formation of a reasonable foundation upon which I am justly entitled. Tesla requested that Morgan agree to take 1/3 of the enterprise, thereby reducing his share by approximately 20%. Please do not spoil the letter by unnecessary reference to your unwillingness of furnishing more money. The whole town knows it. Morgan did his best to scuttle the deal, and with it Tesla fell. His body shook violently, and his eyes began to bulge out of his head. Forgetting to shave or even shower, the ailing engineer grabbed the first train to Shoreham and ran from the station to his precious tower, just a few hundred yards away. Clutching the girders for support as he climbed, the pulverized sorcerer ascended 15 stories to the apex and looked out at the flat land which lay undisturbed for miles in every direction. April the 10th, 1906. Dear Mr. Tesla, I have received your letter, and I am very glad to know that you are vanquishing your illness. I have scarcely ever seen you so out of sorts as last Sunday, and I was frightened. Yours sincerely, George Sheriff. In May there was a portentous explosion in Bridgeport, which caused a shock wave that was felt in Shoreham. I hope my tower will not be subjected often to such tests, Tesla wrote Sheriff. It was less than a month after the great San Francisco earthquake, but the jolt served to reawaken a new reserve of energy. Working with Sheriff and a few men at the plant, Tesla continued development of his condenser and steam turbine, which he was planning on placing inside a torpedo. Concerned about the stability of the buildings America was constructing, Stanford White wrote the city of San Francisco, telling them to pass stringent laws. The hot-riveted steel buildings stood the shock wonderfully, he concluded. White, like Tesla, was a victim of financial misfortune, and he began drinking heavily. Only 54, his health was in decline, and he was suffering from tuberculosis. In February, the architect had planned to auction off $300,000 worth of his tapestries, sculptures, and paintings in order to reduce his debt by half. But a fire wiped out the uninsured holdings just 2 weeks prior to the sale. Harry Thor, having married Evelyn Nesbit, was having White followed day and night. On June the 25th, 1906, with Evelyn present, Thor snaked his way down the aisle of the Roof Garden restaurant at Madison Square Garden, pearl-handled pistol in hand. While entertainer Harry Short sang "I Could Love 1,000 Girls," Thor spotted and shot the beast between the eyes. Stanford White, designer of Madison Square Garden, the Agriculture Building at the Chicago World's Fair, the Niagara Falls Power Plant, the Capitol in Providence, the Washington Arch in New York, Rosecliff and the Tennis Hall of Fame in Newport, the casino in Narragansett, the Boston train station, the Players Club, numerous churches and other mansions, the new extension on the White House, and Wardenclyffe, was dead. Few attended White's funeral, for he had been accused of raping a 16-year-old girl. But Tesla came. The dream vanquished, the Gilded Age ended. Throughout the year, Tesla's handwriting began to unglue, and by August it completely disintegrated, supporting their hypothesis that he suffered a nervous collapse at that time. Entering his own private hell, the inventor was forced to endure an emotional enervation which caused a corresponding dysfunctional shift in his personality. Self-alienation took hold. Bitterness and displaced anger became manifest as the quirks in his nature became more pronounced. Letters, even to his closest friends, would be signed N. Tesla, not Nikola. The untimely death of William Rankin at the age of 47 in September was another nail in the coffin of his dreams. In a barely legible letter dated October 15, 1906, the last in this incredible series to Morgan, Tesla informed the Wall Street monarch that Messrs. Ryan, Schiff, and Frick were all willing to enter the partnership. "Every opportunity is there. I have high regards for you as a big and honorable man. There is greater power in the leaf of a flower than in the paw of a bear. That is as much as I'll ever say. You are reputed as a builder of properties, but if you prefer in this instance to chop down poles, go ahead." Faust. "Gnash not so thy greedy teeth against me. Great and glorious Spirit, thou that deniest to appear to me, who knowest my heart and soul, why yoke me to this shamefellow who feeds on mischief and feasts on ruin?" Mephistopheles. "Who was it that plunged her into ruin, I or thou?"
This audiobook has been broken into multiple parts to make the download faster. You have reached the end of a part, but not the end of the complete audiobook. So please check your library for the next part of this audiobook.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.
This is Audible.
Wizard. The Life and Times of Nikola Tesla. Biography of a Genius. By Mark J. Cypher. 36. The Child of His Dreams, 1907 to 1908. I do not hesitate to state here for future reference and as a test of the accuracy of my scientific forecast that flying machines and ships propelled by electricity transmitted without wire will have ceased to be a wonder in 10 years from now. I would say 5, were it not that there is such a thing as inertia of human opinion resisting revolutionary ideas. Nikola Tesla, May 16, 1907. "It's 3 o'clock in the morning, Mr. Tesla," George Sheriff rasped into the phone as his wife grumbled in her sleep. "The sheriff's seized the land." "You owed Warden $199, Sheriff said in amazement. Fighting back a flood of tears, the inventor rasped, "I don't have it." "I'll take care of it, Mr. Tesla." "Thank you," Tesla said, as his hand limply hung up the line. His hair dishevelled, his clothes scattered about, the former man of the hour was going to have to let the maid in soon. What would she say about the drapes he had placed over the mirrors? And then there was the tower. He had to go back there to seal up the property. Would he have the strength to make the journey? His appetite all but gone, Tesla hadn't seen his friends for months. He managed a letter to Catherine as he rang room service to send up breakfast. "I'm ever in so much greater trouble," he scratched out on his letterhead. But he would allow no one to truly know the hell he had entered. No sunlight must enter his room. He sat in the shadows and petted a wounded pigeon he had found floundering by the New York Public Library. If Bolt ever knew, the bird would have to be smuggled back out. The withered man reached over to the envelope addressed to him in a feminine hand. Carefully he removed the letter and theatre ticket. Marguerite Merrington had invited him to her new play, Love Finds a Way. He stared at the title and broke down once again into uncontrollable sobs. Reconciling the torment, Tesla eased himself back into the social net as 1907 commenced. As part of his therapy, the recluse would surreptitiously board a moonlight train to Wardenclyffe. There, in the wizard's chambers, the Balkan genie would hook up high-frequency apparatus to his skull and thereby impress macabre waves of soothing electrical energy through his brain. "I have passed 150,000 volts through my head," Tesla told the New York Times, "and did not lose consciousness, but I invariably fell into a lethargic sleep some time after." In May, Tesla was inducted as a member of the New York Academy of Sciences. Slowly, he began to see once again that perhaps his grand plan could be resurrected. To raise the capital to keep his ship afloat, the inventor took out a series of mortgages, subdividing the enterprise into a string of hypothetical parcels. In the spring of 1904, he had borrowed $5,000 from Thomas G. Sherman, a law partner of Stanford White's brother-in-law, and in the winter of 1906 he obtained $3,500 from Edmund Starlow, a son-in-law of one of Rockefeller's Standard Oil partners. But those funds had long disappeared. Having dodged the Waldorf management for nearly 3 years, he took out another mortgage for an additional $5,000 against the rent he owed with the proprietor, George Bolt. And thus began a fresh plan for continuing to live in the lap of luxury without laying out another dime. Bolt had done exceptionally well for himself. Having hobnobbed with the mega-rich for many years, the Waldorf manager had been able to take advantage of a number of inside opportunities. By 1907, a millionaire in his own right, he had expanded his base to become a banker, orchestrating the creation of the Lincoln Trust Company, which was located across the street from Madison Square Garden. Everyone, except Tesla, seemed to be flourishing. Morgan, through Jacob Schiff, had finally iced his deal with the Guggenheims to form the Alaska Syndicate, an enormous corporation which had been set up to exploit a copper find in the inviolable northern wilderness. Whereas the Guggenheim Mountain in Utah contained only 2 to 3% ore, this lode, according to John Hayes Hammond's report, was 75% pure copper. A site of incalculable wealth, it would take a fleet of steamships, a 1,000-man crew, and an upfront capital investment of $25 million to construct a railroad just to reach the find. But copper was not all the Morgenheims had their eye on. They also began purchasing coal and iron reserves and hundreds of thousands of acres of forest land. Thus the press, the few environmentalists active at the time, and a significant portion of the American people began to vigorously oppose the Guggen-Morganization of Alaska. With the growing need for copper wire came also a demand for insulation. Seizing the opportunity, Thomas Fortune Ryan and Bernard Baruch went to Europe to sign a contract with the King of Belgium, the former Prince Albert, an acquaintance of Tesla's. Their plan was to take over the rubber industry in African Congo. The financiers negotiated an even split, with the king allocating 25% for his country and retaining 25% for himself. As Baruch returned to Wall Street to handle marketing, Ryan traveled to Africa to oversee the product's manufacture. Naturally, the tire companies were just as interested as the electrical concerns. Once it was realized that Tesla's plans to do away with transmission lines had been abolished, it seemed as if there began a feeding frenzy on copper stocks, as this market was now assured a continually increasing demand. Panic of 1907. The first signs of economic distress was heralded in August, when John D. Rockefeller of Standard Oil was fined the staggering sum of $29 million for price gouging and illegal tariffs. Suddenly, Wall Street became edgy. In October, F. Augustus Heinze, a well-known speculator and enemy of the Guggenheim Syndicate, began dumping large blocks of United Copper onto the market. Heinze miscalculated in his attempts to buy back the stock at a much lower price, and his shifty scheming resulted in a drop in the market and a run on his bank, the Mercantile Trust Company. Due to Heinze's links to other financial institutions, the hysteria spread, and the panic of 1907 began. Depositors emptied out every bank they could get into. J. Pierpont Morgan called an emergency conference of all the bank and trust presidents, gathering them together in his newly constructed library in an all-night vigil. Sitting among his tapestries, original manuscripts, paintings, and jewels, the Wall Street monarch did his best to orchestrate a bailout of those institutions that were salvageable. Some, however, were beyond repair, and the stronger banks would go only so far in dipping into their reserves. Charles Barney, director of the Knickerbocker Trust Company and father of two awfully pretty sisters, pleaded for assistance, but he was rebuked. Barney went home and put a pistol to his head. This act produced a wave of suicides, particularly among the Knickerbocker's 18,000 depositors. With Henry Clay Frick acting as liaison, President Theodore Roosevelt would transfer $25 million into Morgan's control. Although this figure matched the pledge of the stronger institutions, the new influx could only stretch so far. Bolt's Bank, the Lincoln Trust, along with the Knickerbocker, the Mercantile, and half a dozen others, had gone under by the end of the week. Now Tesla's chances of resurrecting his own enterprise became even more remote. "These are simply awful times," Tesla told Scherf. "I cannot understand at all how Americans who are so daring and reckless in other respects can get scared to such a degree. My ship propulsion scheme is really great, and I feel sure that it will pull me out of the hole. Just how, I do not see as yet, because it seems almost impossible to amass any money at all. "We are still waiting to hear from the International Mercantile Marine Company," Scherf said. "Be patient, my man. They are certainly interested, but make conditions which I am unable to accept for the present. If I had just a little capital, I would not worry about finishing my place." "What about Astor?" "He told me over the phone that he would see me as soon as possible, but up to present nothing has materialized. I know now that if I am to get capital, I can only get it from some fellow who has not less than 100 million. Then, Mr. Tesla, let's hope for the best." Dulled by his own suffering, Tesla began edging himself out of his depression by producing a number of acerbic essays for the electrical journals and local newspapers. Covering a wide range of topics, the inventor sought to vindicate himself and thereby try and make sense out of an absurdly ironic situation. Simultaneously, he sought to explain the Wardenclyffe vision yet again in the vain hope that some financier with a transcendent vision would come to his rescue. He was searching for a hero, not only for selfish desires, but in his eyes, for the future of the planet. Under the guise of commenting on Commodore Perry's exploration of the North Pole, Tesla explained in detail the modus operandi of his world wireless scheme. For Harvard Illustrated, he discussed Lowell's Martian discoveries and the way to signal the nearby planet for the world and the English mechanic and world of science. He described how a tidal wave could be created by using high explosives to set the entire Earth in oscillation, and discussed how this wall of water could be harnessed to engulf an advancing enemy. And for the New York Sun and New York Times, he drafted a flurry of letters to the editor on such topics as his dirigible wireless torpedo, the transmission of voice by means of wireless, the narcotic influence of certain periodic currents when transmitted through the body for therapeutic reasons, the inefficiency of Marconi's system, and the piracy of his oscillators by Marconi and another wireless inventor, Valdemar Paulsen. Tesla also declared that the telephone was invented by Philip Rice before Bell, and the incandescent lamp by King and J.W. Starr before Edison. Unlike Bell and Edison, Tesla wrote, "I had to cut the path myself, and my hands are still sore." After reviewing his bitter battle for vindication as the true author of the AC polyphase system against such feeble men as Professor Ferraris, the wizard went on to discuss his seminal work in wireless telegraphy. "It will never be possible to transmit electrical energy economically through this planet and its environment except by essentially the same means and methods which I have discovered," he declared, "and the system is so perfect now that it admits of but little improvement. Would you mind telling a reason why this advance should not stand worthily besides the discoveries of Copernicus?" This was a new Tesla, resentful, indignant, defiant, petulant. He was the discoverer of the AC polyphase system, the induction motor, fluorescent lights, mechanical and electrical oscillators, a novel steam propulsion system, wireless transmission of intelligence, light and power, remote control and interplanetary communication. He was an original discoverer, whereas Bell and Edison had merely modified the works of others. How dare the world deny him his due? Tesla's inventions were even at the heart of the new electric subway system, which had just opened its doors beneath the thriving metropolis. Flooding, however, was a continual problem which marred this newest Tesla spin-off. The public had to be warned lest water cause corrosion of vital components, thereby increasing the risk of causing an explosion, and so another article advised the authorities on ways to cure the problem. After one of his bi-weekly trips to his esteemed tonsorial artist for the warm compresses on his face and vigorous head massage to stimulate brain cells, Tesla picked up his walking cane and strolled out in his green suede high-tops to 42nd Street, to the entranceway of the freshly tiled Interborough Catacombs. He was looking for new office space. Descending the staircase, the creator was overtaken with a pompous sense of pride as he stood by the tracks to await the next train. It was an almost magical experience for him to drop down in one part of the city only to pop up majestically in another spot a few minutes later. While waiting at a stop one ordinary day in 1907, he was approached by a lad and asked if he were the great Nikola Tesla. Catching a gleam in the inquirer's eye, the inventor answered in the affirmative. "I have many questions to ask you," the youngster said as Tesla moved forward to step aboard the train. "Well then, come on," Tesla responded, unable to understand why the boy hesitated. "I do not have enough money for the fare," was the embarrassed reply. "Oh, is that all?" The electronic savant chuckled as he tossed the youngster the required sum. "What's your name?" "O'Neill, sir. Jack O'Neill. I'm applying for a job as a page for the New York Public Library." "Good. We can meet there, and you can help me research the history of some patents I'm investigating." O'Neill, who also had a keen interest in psychic phenomena, would go on a decade later to become a science reporter for the Long Island paper, the Nassau Daily Review-Star. Eventually, he took a position at the Herald Tribune, where he won the Pulitzer Prize before penning Prodigal Genius. In June came yet another legal suit, again from Warden, only this time from his heirs, as he had passed away. The amount was for $1,080, for money owed on an option Tesla had on 400 acres adjacent to the 200 he controlled. "This is an old case which has been dragging in the courts for years," Tesla told the Sun reporter. "I had intended to use this land for an agricultural experiment in fertilizing soil by means of electricity. I thought that by the use of certain electrical principles in producing nitrogen, the soil could be increased very much, and thus I had agreed to take a certain option. But subsequently I discovered that the person who entered into the agreement had no right to make such a disposition. I told him the option was off. But the heirs of the owner had simply pressed the claim, and it is very likely that it will have to be paid." VTOLs, a history of vertical and take-off landing aircraft. June 8, 1908. My dear Colonel, I am now ready to take an order from you for a self-propelled flying machine, either of the lighter or heavier-than-air type. Yours sincerely, Nikola Tesla. Astor was particularly interested in flying machines, but as would become his habit, Tesla would be working at cross purposes. He wanted the good colonel to fund this work in aeronautics, but in actuality his ultimate goal was to earn enough money so that he could return to Long Island and reopen his world telegraphy plant. Thus, any potential profits were always threatened by the greater plan. This problem would continue to encumber any possible deal, especially with someone like Astor, who knew full well the inventor's primary intentions. One of Tesla's most confounding prognostications came at the onset of 1908. Having finally located a new workspace at 165 Broadway, Tesla felt that he was getting back on track. Shortly after he moved in, he received an invitation to speak at a Waldorf Astoria dinner in honor of himself and Rear Admiral Charles Sigsbee. "This coming year will dispel one error which has greatly retarded aerial navigation," Tesla prophesied. "The aeronaut will soon satisfy himself that an aeroplane is altogether too heavy to soar, and that such a machine, while it will have some use, can never fly as fast as a dirigible balloon." In strong contrast with these unnecessarily hazardous trials are the serious and dignified efforts of Count Zeppelin, who is building a real flying machine, safe and reliable, to carry a dozen men and provisions, and with a speed far in excess of those obtained with aeroplanes. Assuming that the viscosity of the atmosphere exceeded that of water, Tesla had calculated that an airplane could never fly much faster than an aqueous craft. The inventor further reasoned that for highest velocities the propeller is doomed. Not only was its rotational speed restrictive, it was also subject to easy breakage. The prop plane, according to calculations, would have to be replaced by a reactive jet. In the short run, that is, for the next 30 years, the airship was the preferred method of passenger travel. Berlin, May 30th, 1908. Count Zeppelin, whose remarkable performances in his first airship brought such signal honors, today accomplished the most striking feat in his career so far. He guided his Zeppelin II, with 2 engineers and a crew of 7 aboard, a distance of more than 400 miles without landing. All through the night the vessel sped over Württemberg and Bavaria, passing over sleeping countryside and villages and cities hardly less asleep. It was announced and widely published that the Count would come to Berlin and land at the parade ground. In expectation of the event, the Emperor and Empress and hundreds of thousands gathered there. It would be 2 decades before Lindbergh would capture the imagination of the public by flying solo in a propeller-driven airplane across the high seas. But airships were already close to accomplishing that feat. In 1911, Joseph Brooker formed the transatlantic airship expedition, but was beaten in the quest by the British Air Force, which succeeded in crossing the Atlantic 8 years later. During World War I, the Zeppelin ran frequent bombing missions from Berlin to London. Robert Underwood Johnson flew with 50 other passengers in a similar Leviathan over Rome just 2 years later in 1919. However, by the late 1920s, this infamous legacy was all but forgotten, as these great airships were flying regularly across the Atlantic from Europe to both North and South America, and Germany was enjoying a reputation as the new leader in futuristic technology. One curious and unfortunate footnote to history was the senseless choice to fill those blimps with hydrogen, a highly explosive gas, instead of non-flammable helium. Had the engineers insisted on the much safer medium by heeding Tesla's 1915 warning, the great Hindenburg disaster of 1937 would never have taken place, and the use of Zeppelins would probably have continued for many more years to come. The problem stemmed all the way back to the late 1700s, when Jacques Charles, a French scientist, discovered that hydrogen was 14 times lighter than air and filled a balloon with it. Monsieur Charles, like Count Zeppelin of Tesla's time, gained great notoriety by travelling in his balloon 15 or 20 miles at a stretch. Today, airships create stable platforms for TV sports cameras, advertisers use them because of their unique ability to generate brand name recognition, and the military likes them because they offer singular advantages over the helicopter. They can be used for low-flying rescue missions without creating hazardous turbulence. They can be used to detect the submarine launching of cruise missiles by positioning themselves in a single area for hours or days on end, and they are extremely difficult to locate by ground surveillance. Why don't they show on radar? A recent Popular Mechanics article asks. Because the skyship's gondola is made of Kevlar. The envelope is of polyurethane fiber and is filled with helium. They all have little or no radar register. The next generation airships would sip fuel, and they would stay operational for months at a time. As these are developed for military use, it's not too far-fetched to predict that airships of the 21st century may even be used for transatlantic passenger service. Tesla reveals in his Waldorf Astoria speech his prophecy of the inevitable development of the jet plane, which would be about as close as he would come to explaining his highly novel and still obscure invention of an airplane that operated much like today's VTOL, vectored thrust aircraft. Tesla had played with a number of airship designs since his college days. One of his models, drawn up in 1894, was a traditionally shaped hot air balloon. Inspired by those he had seen at the World Fairs in Paris and Chicago, this dirigible received its continuing supply of heat from a gigantic induction coil that was placed high above the gondola, in the center of the hot air container. The more recent model, which resembled a gigantic teardrop, took into consideration aerodynamic principles uncovered by such researchers as Leonardo da Vinci, Count von Zeppelin, and Lawrence Hargrave, an Australian who in 1890 fashioned rubber band-powered prop planes which travelled through the air over distances exceeding 100 yards. This design was schematically prepared in the shape of a conventional airfoil by one of Tesla's draftsmen in 1908. My airship will have neither gas bag, wings, nor propellers. You might see it on the ground, and you would never guess that it was a flying machine. Yet it will be able to move at will through the air in any direction with perfect safety, higher speeds than have yet been reached, regardless of weather and obvious holes in the air or downward currents. It will ascend in such currents if desired. It can remain absolutely stationary in the air, even in a wind, for a great length of time. Its lifting power will not depend on any such delicate devices as the bird has to employ, but use positive mechanical action. Stability will be achieved through gyroscopic actions of my engine. It is the child of my dreams, the product of years of intense and painful toil and research. Tesla's vehicle had the reactive jet placed at its leading edge or bulky end, and the 50 steering escape valves placed at the opposite trailing edge or tapered end. If fashioned as a lighter-than-air dirigible, the ship would have been modelled in part after the work of Henri Giffard, a Frenchman who invented the first dirigible in 1852, as well as Count von Zeppelin, the inventor who had been the first to construct a successful prototype with a rigid metal framework within the bag. Zeppelin was also one of the first to take into consideration wind resistance. His ships could travel at speeds of more than 40 miles per hour. A well-designed airfoil can develop a lift force many times its drag. This allows the wing of an airplane to serve as a thrust amplifier. If the thrust is directed horizontally, a vertical lift force large enough to overcome the vehicle's weight can be developed. Thus it appears that Tesla's reactive jet prototype could also have been fabricated in a heavier-than-air design. Oliver Chanute, Monsieur Goupil, and O. Littenthal were other gay 90s aeronauts whose patented works Tesla had studied. Naturally, he was also influenced by Samuel Langley and the Wright brothers, both of whom had actually produced heavier-than-air models that had actually flown. The hovercraft. Another horseshoe crab-shaped VTOL designed by Tesla was called a hovercraft. This vehicle, which resembled a corvette, placed the powerful turbine horizontally within its center. Operating much like a great fan, the engine created a heavy downdraft which caused the vehicle to rise up and ride along the ground on a layer of air. This invention, which apparently worked much like the hovercraft depicted in the original Star Wars film, was the early precursor of the Army's car-sized aerial jeep, which derived its thrust from ducted fans mounted rigidly in the airframe. To fly horizontally, the entire craft was tilted slightly by the leaning motion of the driver. In 1960, Scientific American could write that this design is being explored because of its simplicity and adaptability for flying at very low altitudes. It is doubtful that Tesla ever constructed any of the heavier-than-air hovercrafts, although he may have built a hydrofoil model to skim over the Hudson. There's no doubt that he also constructed lighter-than-air vessels which could be operated by means of remote control. Ideas inherent in Tesla's hovercraft and paramecium-shaped reactive jet dirigibles evolved into today's Harrier fighter plane, a supersonic aircraft considered one of the military's most potent fighting machines, and the new, yet-to-be-built, Lockheed Martin X-33, which is a lightweight VTOL replacement of the Space Shuttle, having a new experimental engine, the plane itself being shaped like a flat flying wing. The seeds of this technology can also be traced to the work of A.F. Salm, a prominent aeronautical engineer who patented in 1921 an airplane with a wing that could deflect the propeller slipstream to provide lift for hovering. Although Salm did not actually construct his plane, his concept, which may have been influenced by Tesla's work, evolved into the English Hawker, a British fighter developed in the 1960s. This airplane utilized nozzles to deflect a slipstream downward for vertical takeoff or for hovering, and horizontally for normal flight. Utilizing thrust vectoring, this apparatus became more workable with the development of the Pegasus engine, an extremely powerful turbojet found in the Harrier, which was unveiled in 1969. From the pilot's point of view, there is only one extra control in the cockpit, a single lever to select the nozzle angle. AV-8B Harrier, the U.S. Marines ground support jet, can take off vertically, hover close to a battlefield, and let loose missiles, cluster bombs, or smart bombs. Flying on a beam of energy. Whether or not Tesla was able to perfect his design for aircraft that operated without any fuel by deriving energy from wireless transmitters is unknown. This concept, however, has been adopted by the military. In 1987, the New York Times and also Newsweek reported large glider planes powered without fuel. Their energy is derived from microwaves beamed up from ground transmitters to large flat panels of rectinae on each wing's underbelly. These special antennas, laced with tiny rectifiers that turn alternating current into direct current, power an electric motor to run the craft's propeller. This concept is also utilized as solar panels on board spacecraft as well as on solar-powered automobiles. The Fliverplane. Tesla designs weird craft to fly up, down, sideways. Craft combines qualities of helicopter and plane. Detailed descriptions were available yesterday of the helicopter airplane, the latest creation of Nikola Tesla, inventor, electrical wizard, experimenter, and dreamer. It is a tiny combination plane, which its inventor asserts will rise and descend vertically and fly horizontally at great speed, much faster than the speed of the planes of today. But despite the feats which he credits to his invention, Tesla says it will sell for something less than $1,000. Although this article was written in 1928, Tesla first applied for patents on his new method of aerial transportation in 1921. Nevertheless, designs for propeller-driven VTOL aircraft dated back even before the turn of the century. One of Tesla's earliest and most primitive helicopters looked much like a wash basin, with vertical shaft rising from its center. Flailing out like the skeletons of two umbrellas stacked above one another were its dual horizontal propellers. This vehicle evolved into the Fliverplane, which took off vertically like a helicopter and then flew like a normal airplane when the propeller and the craft were rotated 90 degrees into the horizontal position. The concepts found in Tesla's Fliverplane can be found in another advanced military VTOL aircraft called the V-22 Osprey. In this design, the body of the vehicle resembles a normal military transport plane. It is the propellers at the ends of each wing which rotate 90 degrees from the helicopter position for vertical takeoff into the normal airplane position for forward flight. Used in the recent war with Iraq, February 1990, this vehicle, like the aerial Jeep and VTOL Harrier fighter jet, evolved directly out of Tesla's designs. As Tesla's work in aeronautics has never received much publicity, it's quite possible that the military adopted it in secret. VTOLs can be grouped into four general categories. The aircraft could be tilted, the thrust could be deflected, the propeller or turbojet engine could be tilted, or a dual propulsion system could be utilized. Bell Labs began constructing propeller-driven VTOLs in the 1940s. Early models included the wing-tilted XC-142A, developed by Vaught, Hiller and Ryan, and the X-19 propeller-tilted craft, developed by Curtiss and Wright. The new weapons. Every service has its favorite new weapon, and the Marine Corps' favorite is the V-22 Osprey, an aircraft that can take off like a helicopter and fly like a plane. Just the craft to ferry Marines quickly and far into the desert, argue its manufacturers Bell Helicopter Textron Incorporated and Boeing Vertol Company. The vehicle can carry 24 men and costs $40 million. 37. Bladeless Turbines, 1909 to 1910. March 22nd, 1909. My dear Colonel Astor, I was very glad to know from the papers that you have returned to the city, and hasten to tell you that my steam and gas turbine, pump, water turbine, air compressor and propeller have all proved a great success. In the opinion of very competent men, these inventions will create an enormous revolution. My gas turbine will be the finest thing in the world for a flying machine, because it makes it possible to attain as much as 4 to 5 horsepower for each pound of weight. I have been hard at work on a design of the flying machine, and it's going to be something very fine. It will have no screw propeller or inclined plane, rudder or wane. In fact, nothing of the old, and it will enable us to lift much greater weights and propel them in the air with ever so much greater speed than has been possible so far. We are making up an automobile in which these new principles are embodied, and I am also designing a locomotive for a railroad, and am adapting my new propulsion scheme to one of the biggest Atlantic liners. All this information is confidential. I am merely writing knowing that you will be pleased with my success. With kind regards, I am sincerely yours, Nikola Tesla. With the death of the fragile poet Robert Watson Gilder in November 1909, came the advance in position from associate editor to editor-in-chief by Robert Underwood Johnson. Numerous dignitaries attended the sombre affair, including Mark Twain and the latest rising star in the world of poetry, the 24-year-old wonder child, George Sylvester Viereck. It was an undesirable way for Luca to gain the promotion, but clearly the trustees had never considered anyone else for the post. Gilder's passing was yet another tangible sign of the end of an important era for the century. Tesla came over for Christmas dinner, and the discussion drifted to the problems Robert will now have in boosting a steadily declining circulation. In competition with a new crop of plebeian journals, Luca was forced to lower his standards by allowing the introduction of such four-letter words as hell to grace the Century's pages. Catherine was interested in discussing Sir Oliver Lodge's recent contention that he had located a medium that had spoken to dead members of the Society of Psychical Research, but Tesla thought such form of wireless communication poppycock. He was more interested in tearing apart Professor Pickering's supposition that he could erect a set of mirrors in Texas with $10,000 to signal the Martians. The idea that mirrors might be manufactured which will reflect sunlight in parallel beams for the time being is beyond our range of ability. But there is one method of putting ourselves in touch with other planets, Tesla said, as the eyes of his hosts lit up once again with the idea of Wardenclyffe. Capital, of course, was the problem, so Tesla began to describe his newest money-making scheme. It was his latest invention. Accused of being a visionary and dreamer, the consummate inventor taxed his powers of concentration in the calm retirement of the night to cultivate a way to bail himself out. Often he would leave his walled-off suite to walk the streets after hours and cogitate. His favourite sanctum was the colossal hall at Grand Central Station. There, in the slumbering chapel, at 4 in the morning, he could follow the echo of his solitary thoughts down and into the tunnels to where the trains were berthed, or up and around the majestic marble staircases which overlooked the vast commuters' arena, and skyward to the starry dome, where the constellations and corresponding mythical gods were painted on the ceiling. This was his grand station for bouncing ideas of Pegasus or Hercules, Virgo, Centaurus, Gemini, Hydra, or Orion. Perhaps Argus, the ship, could provide a clue. Wardenclyffe had become his obsession, and unless he was able to resurrect it in toto, he would never feel fulfilled. In-between measures were out of the question. Either he launched the entire edifice, or he would launch none of it. Scherf would visit the plant periodically with his wife, his father, and newborn baby, and handle the money on the taxes and salary for Mr. Hawkins, who was retained as a guard. But Tesla's competition had now caught up, and in some ways was surpassing, if not replacing, his vision. Airplanes and zeppelins were clotting the skies. The powers opposing illuminants without filaments were becoming more entrenched, and wireless transmitters were springing up like mushrooms at the banks of a woodland stream. In January 1908, the French placed a broadcast station atop the Eiffel Tower for the purpose of transmitting messages to Morocco. The director of operations predicted that such impulses should theoretically go around the world and return to the tower. Leader Forrest began to gain momentum in the States, and soon began contracting with the government and the millionaires for the erection of radio telephones, which he placed on the roofs of the tallest structures in Manhattan. In 1907 he had aired the voice of Enrico Caruso, who was singing at the Metropolitan Opera House. Most of the listeners were in nearby boats. Concurrently, de Forest had refined a way to boost the speed of Morse code transmissions. He could now direct telegrams at the astonishing rate of 600 words per minute. "I can confidently predict," de Forest proclaimed, "that within the next 5 years every ship will be equipped with the wireless telephone. I look forward to the day when by this means the opera may be brought into every home. Some day the news and even advertising will be sent out to the public over the wireless telephone." De Forest went on to criticize Marconi's devices, which still had not solved the problem of static interference, and predicted that his new system for tuning would eventually become standard. The following year he signed a contract for the radio wireless with Bell Telephone and installed operations between Philadelphia and New York. Tesla was becoming a footnote to the field, Mr. Bolt hurling his own insult by hiring United Wireless to place 2 40-foot wireless transmitters on the roof of the Waldorf and paying them $3,000 for the work. Marconi, however, was still the man of the hour, his name a household word, as the New York Times boasted in every Sunday supplement, a crest banner above their masthead boldly depicting Marconi wireless transmitters traversing continents and seas. The Prime Mover. The Tesla turbine is the apotheosis of simplicity. It is so violently opposed to all precedents that it seems unbelievable. With his wireless project evidently far in advance of the times, Tesla devoted himself to other inventions which appealed more to practical men. After years of careful thinking, I found that what the world needed most was an efficient prime mover. Tesla was referring to his new invention of a powerful and lightweight turbine, one that could be used to replace the gasoline engine in the car, fitted on airplanes, torpedoes, or ocean liners, or converted into a pump for transporting air, solids, or fluids. This remarkable machine could be used to create liquid oxygen, or even be placed above incinerators to convert wasted heat into electricity. Born of Dana and Nico's childhood play with water wheels in Smiljan, the multifaceted and revolutionary device first became manifest in 1906 to 1907. It was called the bladeless turbine. Latest marvel from the monarch of mechanics, Frank Parker Stockbridge. You've got what Professor Langley was trying to evolve for his flying machine, an engine that will give a horsepower for a pound of weight, I suggested. I have got more than that, replied Dr. Tesla. I have an engine that will give 10 horsepower to a pound of weight. This is 25 times as powerful as the lightest weight engines in use today. The lightest gas engine used on aeroplanes weighs 2½ pounds and produces 1 horsepower. With that weight, I can produce 25 horsepower. This means the solution of the problem of flying, I suggested. "Yes, and many more," was the reply. "It is the perfect rotary engine. It is an accomplishment that mechanical engineers have been dreaming about ever since the invention of steam power." The inventor thereupon proceeded to explain its principles. Having studied the properties of water and steam as they pass through a propeller, Tesla explored the relationship of viscosity and adhesion to the blade's corresponding spin. The metal does not absorb any of the water, but some of the water adheres to it. The drop of water may change its shape, yet its particles remain intact. This tendency of all fluids to resist separation is viscosity, the inventor explained. By exploiting these principles, Tesla had patented an entirely new kind of turbine which did away with the blades of an everyday propeller and replaced them with a series of discs thinly spaced apart like a stack of pennies on their side. Each disc had a hole in its center for removing the incoming fluid and for turning the central shaft. Whereas skin friction impedes a ship in its progress through the sea or an aeroplane through the air, Tesla exploited this seeming obstacle so that the spin of the turbine would be enhanced rather than retarded by the adhesion and viscosity of the medium. It was another stroke of genius from the master. Spiral action was initiated at the periphery of each disc as the water formed a tighter and tighter corkscrew pattern as the center hole was approached, thus augmenting spiral action. In this way, a fluid under pressure, such as steam, could enter the sealed chamber which housed the horizontal stack of discs and cause them to rotate. Following the natural tendency to create a whirlpool, like water exiting a drain, the fluid would naturally spin faster and faster as it moved toward the center. Simultaneously, its property of adhesion would carry or drag the corresponding disc around and around at a faster rate, and this spin could be used, for instance, as a turbine to generate electricity. Reversing the entire process would turn the instrument into a pump, and hooking it up to an induction motor could transform the instrument into a jet engine. One such pump, now in operation with 8 discs 18 inches in diameter, pumps 4,000 gallons a minute to a height of 360 feet. Suppose now we reversed the operation, continued the inventor. Suppose we had water or air under pressure or steam under pressure and let it run into the case in which the discs are contained. What would happen? The discs would revolve and any machinery attached to the shaft would be operated. You would convert the pump into an engine, I suggested. That is exactly what would happen. What does happen, replied Dr. Tesla. Then, too, Dr. Tesla went on, there are no delicate adjustments to be made. The distance between the discs is not a matter of microscopic accuracy. Coupling these engines in series, one can do away with gearing in machinery. The motor is especially adapted to automobiles, for it will run on gas explosions as well as on steam. With a 1,000-horsepower engine weighing only 100 pounds, imagine the possibilities. In the space now occupied by the engines of the Lusitania, 25 times her 80,000 horsepower could be developed, were it possible to provide boiler capacity sufficient to furnish the necessary steam. Here is an engine that will do things no other engine ever has done. In January 1909, George Scherf, who was now working for a sulfur company, sent off a pleading letter for financial aid to Tesla. My creditors are hounding me hard. Anything you can do for me will be much appreciated, Scherf wrote. Instead of sending him money, Tesla sent a check for Mrs. Schwartz, yet another disgruntled investor. In need himself, Scherf tried to divert the funds, but Tesla, having been in Scherf's position numerous times, wrote back light-heartedly, I am sorry to note that you are losing your equanimity and poise. Mrs. Schwartz is weak, and you are fully able to fight your own battles. You must pull yourself together and banish the evil spirits. Shortly thereafter, Scherf sent off another note informing Tesla that he had prepared the taxes for Wardenclyffe. A few nights ago, Scherf added, a burglar entered my house and cleaned all the cash out of my pockets. Tesla took the hint and began recompensing his former secretary, sending a check in November. November the 11th, 1909. Dear Mr. Tesla, thank you for the $200. What gives me more pleasure than the money is the concrete evidence it furnishes of your progress towards the success for which you have battled so long and hard. Sincerely, George Scherf. In March 1909, Tesla had formed the Tesla Propulsion Company with Joseph Hoadley and Walter H. Knight. With stock capitalized at $1 million, it was announced in electrical world that turbines were being sold to the Alabama Consolidated Coal and Iron Company. Tesla also set up other firms, the Tesla Ozone Company, capitalized at $400,000, which produced ozone, and the Tesla Electrotherapeutic Company, which marketed electrotherapeutic machines with Colonel Ray. Present-day ozone therapy. During a recent symposium marking the 100 years since Tesla's arrival in America, G. Frybot, a medical doctor who used Tesla's ozone-producing equipment, stated that by injecting pure ozone directly into the bloodstream of a man afflicted with colon cancer, 30 tumors were released. According to Frybot, this form of oxygen, which is naturally produced by the sun's action on the upper reaches of the atmosphere, contains oxidizing, antiseptic, and germicidal power, bringing palliative and curative results to many individuals. When questioned about the dangers of creating embolisms, Frybot noted that air embolisms are not caused by bubbles of oxygen in the bloodstream, as is commonly believed, but rather by impurities carried by the oxygen. This work is new and controversial, although verification of these findings has been established by physicians. Tesla, of course, did not inject ozone into people. However, he did construct an electrotherapeutic device for Scherf's wife, who was suffering from an ailment at that time. "I believe that it will do you and Mrs. Scherf a lot of good," Tesla wrote, adding for the Sally, "unless you have no electric supply circuit in your home, in which case it will be necessary to move into other quarters." Throughout 1909 and 1910, the inventor shuffled back and forth between Providence, Bridgeport, and New York City, where he had installed various renditions of his turbines. Most of the development work was at Bridgeport. "I am now at work on new ideas of an automobile locomotive and lathe, in which these inventions of mine are embodied, and which cannot help but prove a colossal success," he wrote Scherf. "The only trouble is to get the cash, but it cannot last very long before my money will come in a torrent, and then you can call on me for anything you like." He added optimistically in another letter, "Things are developing very favorably, and it seems that my wildest dream will be realized before next summer." In March 1910, Owen's wife gave birth to their first son, Robert Underwood Johnson, Jr. But in the spring, a potential disaster of foreboding invaded the Tesla circle when it was announced that John Jacob Astor and his son Vincent were lost at sea. The inventor was one of the many who rejoiced when the news arrived that one of the 10 richest men in the world and his son emerged unscathed. It is uncertain to what extent Astor contributed to Tesla's work with the turbine. However, there is some evidence that the inventor installed a hydrofoil jet engine in a mysterious craft Astor had docked in the Harlem River. The New York Times reported that the vehicle seemed to embody an airship with a practical watercraft. If this was a radical flying machine, which Tesla was working on, both he and Astor made sure that the reporters were kept away. One of the advantages of such a prototype was that the danger of death resulting from experimental flights could be minimized, since the craft was theoretically set up to hover only above water. Feeling well on the way to success, Tesla wrote his friend Charles Scott at the Westinghouse Corporation for an order of 1 million induction motors to drive his turbines. "But as I have learned to go slow," he added to the letter, "I shall take only one at first." In November 1910, with his newfound tidal wave of momentum, he moved his headquarters to the prestigious 48-story Metropolitan Towers located at 1 Madison Avenue, just across the way from the Garden. With an office suite on the 20th floor, right beneath the skyscraper's famous tower clock, the inventor could look out on the burgeoning metropolis from the tallest building in the world, to plan his next move for the recapture of his holy grail, his world telegraphy scheme. 38. The Hammond Connection, 1909 to 1913. November the 8th, 1910. My dear Mr. Hammond, Jr., I was glad to read the enclosed newspaper reports. This is water on my mill. Just go ahead and make a lot of money, and I will sue for infringement, and we will divide. Yours sincerely, N. Tesla. It is unclear as to exactly when and in what capacity John Hayes Hammond Sr. became involved financially with Nikola Tesla. John O'Neill, who knew the inventor for nearly 40 years, wrote in his biography that Hammond Sr. gave Tesla a gift of $10,000 for the development of the teleautomaton, which was unveiled in 1898. John Hayes Hammond Jr., or Jack Hammond, contradicted this assertion, writing 12 years after the book's publication, "My father was financing one of his later inventions, and in this way I had the opportunity of meeting him even when I was at Yale, 1907 to 1910. Thus, based on Jack's letter, Hammond Sr. most likely helped finance Tesla's bladeless turbine, although he may have invested in Wardenclyffe or some other enterprise. In either case, it is unlikely that Hammond presented Tesla with an outright gift, so it is clear that at least part of O'Neill's statement is incorrect. One of Hammond Sr.'s oldest friends, stemming from childhood, was Darius Ogden Mills. Both men grew up as California gold miners. Mills, a long-standing friend of Stanford White's, became a principal in the Edison Illuminating Company back in 1883, along with J. Pierpont Morgan. As a business associate of John Jacob Astor in the late 1890s, Mills was involved in the financing of the Niagara Falls enterprise, and probably invested in Tesla's company as well. Tesla also knew Hammond's brother Richard, who had been to Niagara Falls to hear the inventor's invocation. Having correctly anticipated a depression resulting from Grover Cleveland's 1892 election, Hammond had travelled with his wife and family to South Africa to run the Bonato brothers' gold and diamond mines. Thus, he was on the other side of the globe at the time of Tesla's work in telecommunications. Nevertheless, it is entirely possible that through Mills, Hammond participated in the venture. Jack Hammond, who would have been 10 years old in 1898, would have therefore learned about this technology at an impressionable age. As the focus of Jack's extraordinary career revolved around his work in radio-guided weaponry systems, this early Tesla connection would help explain his ardent interest. Although Jack made no secret of crediting Tesla as being the primary inventor of telecommunications, he may still have wished to suppress Tesla's ultimate role in influencing so greatly the direction his life would take. According to Jack Hammond's research, Professor Ernest Wilson in 1897 controlled a torpedo on the Thames by Hertzian waves. He is the pioneer inventor in this art. John Hayes Hammond, Sr. John Hayes Hammond, Sr., whose life became fictionalized as the heroic Clay in Soldiers of Fortune, was the ultimate daredevil. Born in 1855, Hammond's maternal grandfather, Colonel John Coffee Hayes, was a Texas Ranger and the first sheriff of the wickedest city in the world, the seaport and bonanza town of San Francisco. Raised in California during the gold rush, Hammond's father, Richard Pindall Hammond, was a West Point graduate and a friend of Robert E. Lee's, and also Franklin Pierce. Hammond was also a gold miner and federal tax collector for the port of San Francisco. Schooled at Yale University with a major in mining, Hammond continued his studies in the mid-1870s in Europe. After his return, the energetic adventurer set out for the Sierra Madre in his search for silver and gold. Traveling with his family and brother Richard, Hammond encountered Apache Indians on the warpath and Mexican desperados in his quest for buried treasure. By way of encouragement, Hammond stated, "My wife frequently declared that in case Dick and I should be killed, she would faithfully promise to shoot first the women, then her child, and then herself, rather than have them fall into the hands of the Indians." Other excursions included travel through alligator-infested swamps in Central America and the cannibal country of Colombia. Successful in finding gold in Guatemala, Hammond also opened up lead and silver mines throughout Mexico and the Midwest. In 1891, with a 6-gun strapped to each hip, he helped quell a violent mining strike in Montana. But in 1893, unhappy with the new Democratic administration, he decided to leave America, taking his family with him to fulfill his childhood dream of searching for diamonds in the depths of the Dark Continent. Placed in charge of the British Consolidated Goldfields, Hammond made his fortune when he realized that searching for diamonds 2,500 feet under the ground would be much more lucrative when this type of land was selling for $10 per acre, whereas shallow mining stakes were going for $40,000 per acre. Among his children, the most precocious was a 5-year-old named John Hayes Hammond, Jr., or Jack. There was also Harris, 6 years Jack's elder, Richard, a younger brother, and Natalie, a little sister. Swept into the Boer War in 1896, Hammond was arrested by the Transvaal government. Captured with Cecil Rhodes and the infamous Dr. Jameson, who had led a revolt against the Dutch, the elite members of the mining syndicate were sentenced to death by firing squad. With a plea from the U.S. Secretary of State, and perhaps a nudge from Mark Twain, who was in South Africa at the time, they were finally able to buy their way out. According to Hammond, Twain had informed the Dutch that they had captured some of the wealthiest bugs in the world. President Kruger placed the ransom at $600,000, or $125,000 apiece. With Rhodes fronting the booty, the deal was struck and they were released. Hammond, with his wife and family, were free to return to the States. He would pay back his share with future profits from new mining ventures. Considered one of the wealthiest industrialists in the world, with a list of friends that included 3 presidents and former Yale classmate William Howard Taft, John Hayes Hammond Sr. became a natural choice for vice president. Resigning from the Guggenheim Copper Coalition, Hammond sought the position as Taft's running mate with full vigor in 1908, during the initial years of Tesla's partnership with his son, Jack. John Hayes Hammond, Jr. After a short stay in England in 1900, the Hammond family returned to the States and took up residence in Washington, D.C. Hammond Sr. also had an office on Wall Street and a summer home in New Jersey. Having a keen interest in inventors, the mining engineer invited many of them to his home. Included on the list were Alexander Graham Bell, Guglielmo Marconi, Tom Edison, Nikola Tesla, and the Wright brothers. In 1901, when Jack was just 12 years old, he was invited with his father to Menlo Park. There, Edison, who was working on a new process to extract gold from South African ore, showed Jack models of his first phonograph and gave the youth some original sketches. "It may have been this contact," Hammond speculated, "that stimulated my son's interest in the study of electricity." Shortly after Jack entered Yale in 1906, he began to study Tesla's inventions. He also worked for Alexander Graham Bell. Thus it was during his college years that his interest in remote control became reawakened. Tesla and Bell were, so to speak, my scientific godfathers, Jack wrote in his diary. I found them deeply inspiring. Jack's experiments started in early 1908, when he developed an electric steering and also an engine control for a boat, finding that he could control this mechanism over short distances with a radio impulse. It was at this time that the Hammonds set up permanent residence on the harbour at the fishing village of Gloucester, Massachusetts, and it was there that the enthusiastic engineering student performed most of his investigations. Destined to have more patents than any American inventor except Tom Edison, Jack began his interest in inventing during his New Jersey prep school years. His first significant creation, at age 16, was a reverse switch, which automatically turned off his nightlight when the headmaster opened his dorm door to check to see if he was reading after curfew. After this, the floodgates were opened, and by the end of his career, John Hayes Hammond, Jr. had amassed an astounding array of over 800 patents, including inventions in the fields of military warfare, music and sound, no relation to W. H. Hammond of electric organ fame, and home appliances. Some of Jack's most unique contributions included a cigarette case which popped out a lit cigarette when opened, a microwave oven, a push-button radio, a super-heterodyne which greatly amplified radio waves and was coincident with Edwin Armstrong, aircraft guidance systems, a time-controlled gas bomb, a magnetic bottle cap, a combination piano radio phonograph, a windshield washer, a mobile housing unit, and a telestereographer, or mechanism for projecting three-dimensional images via wireless. In September 1909, during his senior year, the budding wunderkind wrote to his father to arrange for a meeting with the Serbian high priest of telotomatics. "Father, I have some important information that I desire to get from Mr. Tesla." Hammond Sr., who had just lost his bid for the vice-presidential slot, made the arrangements. Jack met the 53-year-old inventor at his Metropolitan Towers office in New York the week of September the 26th, and it is most likely that Tesla reciprocated by visiting Gloucester shortly thereafter. Hammond requested that Tesla send his patent information on wireless control of machinery, and Tesla did so before the end of the month. Moonlighting at the patent office in Washington, D.C., Jack had already rigged by this time a 40-foot vessel to be maneuvered by means of wireless. His broadcasting system, in part based on a Marconi design, also utilized Tesla's oscillators and contained two 360-foot radio control towers near the laboratory overlooking Freshwater Cove. With these devices, a man standing at a shore lookout station could steer an empty boat in the water. Jack also asked Tesla to speak at his Yale graduation. This period in Tesla's life was marked by extreme bitterness, because Marconi was rewarded for his piracy with the Nobel Prize in December. Tesla informed Jack that the Italian tinkerer had abandoned the old devices of Hertz and Lodge and substituted mine instead. In this manner, the transmission across the Atlantic was affected. Jack, however, held no ill will toward Marconi, and included him prominently in the 4-volume compendium he was writing on the history of wireless communication. He also invited Marconi to the Gloucester compound and formed a friendship that would last well into the 1930s. Having returned from a European excursion where he had visited electrical engineers and psychic researchers in London, Paris, and St. Petersburg, Jack was able to complete his master's dissertation. Mr. Tesla in 1892 showed that the true Hertzian effect was not a means by which it was possible for a sending station to communicate with a receiving station at any great distance. He demonstrated furthermore that waves propagated at a transmitting station traveled along the ground as a conductor. Today, in 1912, it is acknowledged that these views are correct. It was, however, left to the splendid enterprise of Marconi to crystallize the results of previous investigators into a complete and practical system of space telegraphy. In 1897, Mr. Marconi transmitted messages to a distance of 8.7 miles. Today, Mr. Marconi says that the maximum effective distance of transmission is 6,000 miles. Perturbed with Hammond's decision to highlight Marconi's dubious achievements and proceed in his field of remote control, Tesla sought compensation. Working with Fritz Lowenstein and Alexander Graham Bell, Jack invented a mechanical dog which followed its master when a lantern was beamed at it. Created in the shape of a milk carton on wheels, the critter made use of selenium cells for eyes to receive the glimmering command signal. Hammond assured Tesla that he was not infringing upon his work in telotomatics, but Tesla remained unconvinced, especially after an article in the newspapers reported that Hammond was in the midst of displaying remote-controlled torpedoes to the military. "My dear Mr. Hammond, judging from the enclosed, I think that you are playing a wireless possum. Notwithstanding your assurances, I will watch your progress and bring a friendly suit for infringement as soon as I ascertain that you are in funds." Jack wrote back to reconfirm that he would give proper credit, but Tesla wanted a contract and a percentage of any profits. "My dear Mr. Tesla," the 22-year-old wrote back, "I am very agreeable to share the profits with you, but I shall only on the condition that you share our liabilities also." "As I naturally surmised that your papa would pay all our liabilities," Tesla replied, "I am willing to share in these." Aside from the banter, Tesla was hoping that Hammond would succeed in his interface with the military, for now he would have a market for selling his new bladeless engines. Soon a partnership was formed, Hammond Sr. footing the bill. "Go in on this with your brother Harris," Jack's father cautioned. "He's older than you and more experienced, and be careful with Mr. Tesla. He tends to spend gold as if it were copper." Having studied Tesla's method of selective tuning, Jack came to call it the 1903 prophetic genius patent. Tesla had created this invention due to a recurrent problem which he'd noticed in 1894–95, namely, that he'd been having difficulty illuminating particular bulbs in his laboratory without illuminating others. After studying the work of Herbert Spencer on the combined action of two or more nerves in the human body, the inventor came upon a plan whereby bulbs would illuminate only when a combination of more than one frequency was transmitted. Jack noted that Mr. Tesla resembles his system to a combination lock. Explaining the particulars to the initiate, Tesla showed that devices could be made to respond not only to one frequency, but to 2, 3, or even more. This combined arrangement, analogous to today's TV and telephone scramblers, would not only ensure privacy, it would also allow for a system with a virtually unlimited number of separate channels. The corresponding patent, along with Tesla's method of utilizing resonant earth frequencies for transmission, that is, Tesla currents, became the backbone for a plethora of inventions ranging from military guidance systems to radio and telecommunications. The further development and refinement of this foundation would also eventually make Jack and a few other inventors millionaires, for example, Edwin H. Armstrong. In 1911, writing from the patent office where Jack was still employed, the willing prodigy informed Tesla that he had contacted the War Department with the hope of selling ship-to-shore communication systems capable of transmitting 20 words per minute. Jack had also begun the construction of a military-linked think tank at Gloucester, where he hired such competent engineers as Fritz Lowenstein and Benjamin Franklin Meissner. Born in 1890, Meissner, who would come to author a textbook on radiodynamics with some help from Tesla, became chief assistant at the lab. Having worked for the U.S. Navy in 1908, Meissner had aided in the development of the electric dog and the superheterodyne. He is also credited with inventing the cat whisker, which was a detector on the crystal radio set. Jack was also conferring with Reginald Fessenden, Lee De Forest, John S. Stone, and Guglielmo Marconi. Washington, D.C., February the 16th, 1911. Dear Mr. Tesla, let us create an unpretentious company and call it the Tesla-Hammond Wireless Development Company. In thinking of this name, I have followed Emersonian advice, and as you see, have attached my chariot to a star. The purpose of this company would be to perfect an automatic selective system, to perfect the submersible torpedo, and eventually to carry out your magnificent projects that will wirelessly electrify the world. I am most sincerely yours, John Hayes Hammond, Jr. 202 Metropolitan Towers, New York City. February the 18th, 1911. Dear Mr. Hammond, the Tesla-Hammond combination looks good to me, but we should have to go at it with some circumspection. I have already interested a gentleman who signs himself J.P.M. in a part of my wireless inventions, and my friend Astor is now waiting for the completion of my plant to go into the wireless power transmission business, which should be a colossal success. In the art of teleautomatics, however, I am perfectly free, and will be glad to go into any fair proposition to exploit the field. I think that in a few years this departure will command the attention of the world. I have just completed my turbines, and am starting Monday to install them at the Edison plant, where I expect to show them to you in operation on your next visit to the city. With kind regards, N. Tesla. Writing on his classy Wardenclyffe letterhead, with the magnifying transmitter posing at the top of the page, the inventor pens, in the estimation of this author, a most exasperating dispatch. The tiff that Tesla had had with Morgan had been held in secret. Only a handful of people even knew the details of their contract. Even Tesla's closest friends and latter-day biographers were kept in the dark. However, on another level, it had become obvious by 1911 to all but Tesla that Wardenclyffe was a ship with a lead hull. Still intoxicated with the world telegraphy idea, filled with hope that his new bladeless turbines would cause a revolution, the perennial iconoclast embarked foolhardily, albeit courageously, on the best-case scenario, that he would raise enough capital with new inventions to finally return to Long Island to complete the tower. Perhaps it is still possible at this juncture of his life, if his motor, for instance, replaced the gasoline engine in the automobile or the prop engine in the airplane. However, what was not possible was the intimation in the letter that Morgan was still interested. This was a blatant display of disinformation which the pompous Waldorf dandy conceitedly proclaimed in order to hide the very fact, maybe even to himself, that his optimism was possibly delusion. Here was a chance to develop a concrete wireless system with the backing of the wealthy and powerful Hammond lineage, but Tesla turned the opportunity away because of arrogant, tunnel-minded and narcissistic proclivities, and possibly because of contractual limitations imposed by the Morgan contract. Had he developed the wireless scheme with Jack, he may have had to legally compensate Morgan with 51% of any developments he achieved. Hammond hadn't figured that the star he had hitched himself to was a half-baked comet. The Apostle of Figments. In May 1911, T.C. Martin invited Tesla to address 1,300 members of the National Electric Light Association, which was holding its annual symposium at the Engineering Society building on 39th Street. "There is no enjoyment that I could picture in my mind so exquisite as the triumph which follows an original invention or discovery," the inculcation began. "But the world is not always ready to accept the dictum of the inventor, and doubters are plentiful, so that discoverers have often to swallow bitter pills along with their pleasure." But what magniloquent pills would this mad scientist force his congregation to ingest? Tesla proceeded to dazzle the audience with slides of his AC polyphase system, teleautomaton and world wireless experiments, flashing pictures from Colorado with streamers extending 65 feet. In discussing his method of individuation, he stated that the broadcasting of combination and multiple frequencies was benefited in a system that did not use wires. "All the statements that you read in the newspapers that wireless messages are interfered with," the inventor explained, "are because the workers in that field are laboring under delusions. They are transmitting messages by Hertz waves, and in this way no secrecy is possible." Having skyrocketed his vision to a world which was not of this earth, the wizard now stepped into the shoes of Prometheus. "Now, the discovery of standing waves that I have made upset all that has gone before, for there was a means of projecting energy into space, absolutely without loss from any point of the globe to another, to the antipodes if desired. In fact, a force impressed at one point could be made to increase with distance. You can imagine how profoundly I was affected by this revelation. Technically, it meant that the Earth as a whole had a certain period of vibration." Set against a sky of thunderclouds, the Wardenclyffe citadel was flashed on the screen, its mushroom-shaped vertex looming. "I have annihilated distance in my scheme," Deus roared, "and when perfected, it will not be one mite different than my present plans call for. The air will be my medium, and I will be able to transmit energy of any amount to any place. I will be able to issue messages to all parts of the world, and send forth words which will come out of the ground in the Sahara Desert with such force that they can be heard for 15 miles around. It would be possible by my powerful wireless transmitter to light the entire United States. The current would pass into the air and, spreading in all directions, produce the effect of a strong aurora borealis. It would be a soft light, but sufficient to distinguish objects. Naturally, the tower would also be powerful enough to send signals to nearby planets, especially if there were any Martians out there to receive them." And this was just the introduction to the topic he came to divulge that night, the Tesla bladeless turbine. Tesla began to work on his new engines in earnest, shuffling between Providence and Bridgeport, with most of his operations now shifted to the New York Edison Waterside Station. He also looked for prospective clients. One of his plans was to sell, probably through Jacob Schiff, 500 engines to the Japanese. "By applying my turbine to their torpedo," Tesla wrote Jack's brother Harris, "I can double the power. We should negotiate royalties on the basis of horsepower. Tesla also conferred with GE and the exuberant Cyberling Company, leaders in the development of high-speed powerboats. Promising great success, the Vulcan worked overtime, forging his revolutionary equipment, as Jack continued perfecting a prototype remote-operated boat and a wireless broadcasting station. With a range of 2,000 miles, the Hammond transmitter became the most important private sending station in the world. Jack also studied telephotography, and he worked on perfecting his electric dog. "And if you reverse the motor by pushing over the tail switch," Jack announced to the press, "you can make the dog back away most surprisingly in either direction when you advance upon him with the light." Expanding his market, Tesla designed prototypes that could transmutate the gasoline engine in the automobile. He began to make overtures to Ford Motor Company and also Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, who was planning on putting them in tanks. As with any new creation, there were problems. For instance, because the ball bearings were wearing down too quickly, the discs were not maintaining their spins at optimum accelerations. As a sun dodger, Tesla also had a penchant for working throughout the night, and therefore his labor costs were often double. Naturally, there were other expenditures. Jack suggested more publicity and sent over the well-known journalist Vladimir Kempfert to interview, in Kempfert's words, the temperamental genius for Scientific American. But in Tesla's estimation, he had enough publicity. He needed more capital. Throughout the latter part of 1912 and through the first months of the new year, Tesla sent urgent pleas to his partner. He had expended $18,000, had worked without salary for all this time, and required $10,000 back immediately. "Dear Mr. Hammond, in desperate need of money, I am unable to hold out any longer." But Hammond, who was helping Lowenstein install his wireless equipment aboard Navy ships and competing against DeForest for a $50,000 amplifier deal with AT&T, ignored the request, his brother Harris taking a full quarter of a year to respond. June 10th, 1913. Dear Mr. Tesla, as you know, we have advanced a great many thousands of dollars in the development of this turbine, and have expected each week the past year to be in a position to have tested it. Now we find that the turbine is only partially set up at the Edison plant. We are missing a splendid opportunity of having it thoroughly and honestly tested by people who would be the greatest benefit to us should these tests be successful. Sincerely yours, Harris Hammond. The high priest of teleautomatics was incapable of believing that the son of one of the richest men in the world was scorning his entreaty. Since my notice, I have done the best I could to save what was possible. The sacrifices which I have been compelled to make and the losses which I have suffered are such that if I were dealing with a man less attractive to me than yourself, I would disdain to answer. Tesla also enclosed glowing testaments to the turbine from professors and chief engineers, but the partnership was over. Hammond would not come through. The castle that Jack built. Jack Hammond travelled to Europe only months before World War I to confer with various scientists in order to perfect a better receiving instrument than the Marconi coherer. It appears that Tesla and Hammond were working at cross purposes. As would become obvious, the $10,000 Tesla requested would not have been sufficient to complete his work on the turbines. He probably needed 40 or 50 times that figure, and Jack's main interest lay in the perfection of wireless transmitting and receiving apparatus. The torpedo propellants were really secondary. In retrospect, it seems that Tesla might have been better off abandoning the turbine for the time being and working with Jack to perfect the guidance system. But he was too close to a potential major success to sink more time into an invention he had already perfected 15 years earlier. Jack would go on in 1913 and 1914 to demonstrate his remote-controlled boat before the U.S. military elite. General Weaver, chief of the U.S. Coast Artillery, and a small entourage travelled up to Gloucester to witness the Natalia, the prodigal son's newest success, the general even taking the controls himself. Again and again the flashing craft shot forth and manoeuvred about the harbour under invisible control, while natives of Gloucester gasped in amazement. They saw her headed for a definite mark a mile away, 2 miles, 3 miles away, and strike it with precision every time. A few weeks later, Hammond Jr. demonstrated the long-range capabilities of the vessel. It could operate while 20 miles away from the Gloucester radio transmitter, and in one way or another was directed the full distance of 60 miles to the naval base at Newport by means of wireless. Jack had also perfected the problem of static interference and selective tuning. In December he wrote, "My dear Father, we are now drawing up as systematically as possible the whole proposition to present to the Board of Ordnance. This work means a good deal in the future financial success of the proposition. I am your affectionate son, John Hayes Hammond, Jr." It would be many years, however, before the U.S. government recompensed Jack for his remote-controlled guidance system. He would expend over the next decade in the neighborhood of $750,000 on the operation, expanding the system of radiodynamic control to include aircraft as well as submersibles. Problems in the creation of secret channels were made apparent in 1915 and 1916 when the USS Dolphin successfully interfered with a torpedo launched by Hammond over distances of 200 to 300 feet. But the Hammond system was successful when the torpedo was launched farther away. The War Department also wanted to sustain visual contact of the weapon, so Jack began working on a device to be directed from flying machines. Every problem he encountered, he was able to overcome. The technology was still too new to be used during World War I, and the military kept avoiding expenditure of any funds. Ostensibly waiting for Tesla's fundamental teletomatic patents to expire, Jack finally presented his case before members of Congress. He stated that he had overtures from foreign governments, but he would refuse to negotiate with them because of the importance of the work and loyalty to his country. And so, in 1919, while his father, John Hayes Hammond Sr., continued to gain publicity for his idea of a world court to prevent war, the U.S. Congress and President Wilson approved an appropriation of $417,000 for the war patents for Hammond's son. However, still no monies changed hands. In the 1920s, Jack began working with David Sarnoff, who, along with Guglielmo Marconi and Edwin Armstrong, was forming the seeds of the Radio Corporation of America, RCA. And in 1923, the fruits of his labor paid off when Jack sold a series of wireless patents to RCA for $500,000. But he was still to be compensated by the U.S. government. In 1924, Hammond sent yet another dispatch to the War Department to gain the release of the appropriated funds, which were now up to $750,000. "I have brought the development to a state where we have demonstrated the feasibility of control of standard naval torpedoes while running at depths of 6 feet or over, submerged at speeds of 27 to 30 knots per hour," Hammond wrote. Finally, in December 1924, with the help of Curtis Wilbur, Secretary of the Navy and admirer of Hammond's father, the government made good, recompensing Hammond and assigning his work to a secret file in the Patent Office. Assurances were also given that their exclusive patents did not compete with those sold to RCA. All this took place a full decade after his breakup with his Serbian mentor, who now had the pleasure of simply looking on when others are using my inventions. "I wish him luck," Tesla said, "but still I ought to have had something for it." Tesla also pointed out that Hammond sought his patents just a few months after Tesla's had run out. Now a millionaire on his own merits, Jack set out to fulfill a dream that began in his youth when the family moved to England, namely, to live in a castle. He also fell in love with an artist, Irene Fenton, a lovely daughter of a shipbuilder who unfortunately was married to a shoe merchant. Irene, 45, got divorced and married Jack, 37, clandestinely in 1925, as he began construction of the medieval dwelling which was situated on the cloistered and treacherous coastal cliffs where Longfellow wrecked the fictitious schooner Hesperus in Gloucester. The site was less than a mile from his parents' home. Jack's passion was music. Although not a musician, he had many acoustical patents, and also an organ that was so enormous, comprising 8,000 pipes, that a palace would be the only edifice capable of housing it. Hammond designed the all-stone building around the instrument, complete with parapets, a moat, and a chain-link drawbridge. Inside could be found dark, winding corridors, hidden doorways, and breakaway walls at the entrance of the great room for moving organ pipes into it and out. In the centre of the castle, which today is a museum, Hammond placed an indoor swimming pool and an atrium filled with plants and tropical birds. Ancient artifacts from Europe were purchased, and a nude statue of the celebrated innovator was sculpted, Irene designing a metal fig leaf to subdue the piece. Jack continued to work on a long series of top-secret inventions for the War Department and for himself, as he lived the life of the bon vivant. Visitors to his estate and to his pipe organ concerts in the 1930s included the Hearsts, George Gershwin, Helen Hayes, David Sarnoff, Anne and Theodore Edison, the Marconis, J. Pierpont Morgan's daughter Louisa and her husband Herbert Satterley, Helen Astor, Maria Carnegie, David Rockefeller, the Barrymores, Noel Coward, and Leopold Stokowski. It is doubtful that Tesla ever visited the castle, although he might have, but on March the 30th, 1951, nearly a decade after the Serb's death, another Slav and Teslarian, Andrija Puharic, stopped by. Still interested in extrasensory perception, Jack had invited Puharic, a medical doctor and inventor of hearing aids, along with psychic Eileen Garrett, to his citadel for the purpose of testing her telepathic abilities. Placed in a Faraday cage so that electromagnetic waves could be screened out, Garrett performed at a level that astounded the experimenters. A world traveller and prodigious innovator throughout his life, Jack spent much of his time in the latter years travelling with his wife across the country in a mobile home he had designed. One day, on a trip to see his friend Igor Sikorsky in Bridgeport, the inventor of the helicopter asked if Jack wanted one as a present. "Only if it can take my mobile home," Jack responded. After a long pause, with time out to stare at the mobile monstrosity, Igor responded, "It can be done." John Hayes Hammond Jr. died in 1965 at the age of 77. A genius in his own right, it is unfortunate that his relationship with Tesla was thwarted. Together, they invented a rather sizable chunk of the appliances of the modern era. 39. J.P. Morgan, Jr., 1912 to 1914. April 18, 1912. My dear Mr. Tesla, I attended the Marconi meeting last night in company with illustrious society. The everlasting toastmaster, T.C. Martin, read in most theatrical fashion a telegram, and after a pause of fully 3 minutes, announced its author as Thomas A. Edison. Mr. Marconi gave the history, as he sees it, of wireless up to this date. He does not speak any more of Hertzian wave telegraphy, but accentuates that messages he sends out are conducted along the earth. Pupin had the floor next, showing that wireless was due entirely to one single person. The only speaker of the evening who understood Mr. Marconi's merit, who did not hesitate to vent his opinion, was Steinmetz. In a brief historical sketch, he maintained that while all elements necessary for the transmission of wireless energy were available, it was due to Marconi that intelligence was actually transmitted. That evening was, without any question, the highest tribute that I have ever heard paid to you in the language of absolute silence as to your name. Sincerely yours, Fritz Lowenstein. Tesla was in the midst of working for W.M. Maxwell, superintendent of New York's public schools, on a controversial project to electrify classrooms with high-frequency currents. Following in the footsteps of a highly publicized experiment in